Hi, this is Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. Together, we will consider life, death, and impermanence. Because in between birth and death, we lose things, not just our glasses and our keys. We lose identities, relationships, ideas, and more. But what we can gain right now is facing this together, and we will gain freedom, peace, and progress on our path. Everyone, today it is my honor to be speaking with Wendy Block, and I will share with all of you that I have sat and listened to Wendy give Dharma talks, and they have always been very helpful and coming very much from a place of caring and love, and you will pick up on that. And Wendy, thank you so much for being here, and it would be really nice if you introduced yourself to the group.
All right. Well, thank you, Margaret. So I've been teaching for Insight LA for a number of years, maybe 8 years, I think it is. I started teaching in Long Beach, I would say 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and had an interest in Vipassana meditation and did the dedicated practitioner program at Spirit Rock, and studied with Trudy Goodman and Victor Bird, studied with Trudy for a number of years. In addition, I'm a social worker and a therapist, and I've been practicing for over 30 years, and now focusing on my own private practice. Some of it incorporates mindfulness with children, teens, and adults. Some of it is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that targets the treatment of depression, anxiety, grief issues. And some of it is Buddhist psychotherapy, Buddhist psychology. So it's an exciting time in my life, another chapter, which I'm enjoying.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. And I bet it is fulfilling to be able to bring together your education, your experience, your Buddhist practice, and use all of those together to help people. And it is certainly a time where I'm not a therapist or anything like that, but I respect and see that there's a lot of anxiety and things going on in our world. And some of that has to do with impermanence, which is our topic. My listeners know this, but I just like to remind everyone. In season 1, we really went right to talking about experiences with death and grief, and we can always do that. And then this season, additionally, or I'll say more of our focus is we're really looking at impermanence, the things that happen that aren't like death, like of a human or a loved pet, but things die, right? Like ideas die, beliefs die, relationships die. And we're looking at those because those can become the training ground for facing the bigger. And as I say all that, I wonder, what would you maybe like to share with us in terms of like a story or an experience with impermanence in life? And you probably have multiples. So
in a clinical role over the years, I have sat with many people coping with grief, death, loss, tragedy of all kinds. But having clinical knowledge is knowledge, and having a practice really helps. But this teaching from the Buddha on impermanence has to be something experienced and lived. It's an embodied knowledge. And it doesn't really sink in deeply until we sink in deeply
ourselves
into that knowledge.
Right.
And it's great to study the suttas and to go on retreat and to listen to wonderful teachers. But as the Buddha said, it has to be understood deeply in an embodied way. And for me, that certainly came with a number of losses, like everyone else. That knowledge, that understanding really had to be digested through the direct experience of loss. And this teaching on impermanence, which is anicca in Pali, right? Anicca. And you can't say that word too many times, all day long to be understood. It needs to be held right at the tip of awareness, of knowing, of seeing. That's where anicca belongs. So that it's reflected on all day long.
So I feel like what you're saying, and I just want to make sure I get this right, is when you're saying you can't say it too many times, you weren't saying like, oh, this is a tongue twister. You were saying we could and should be saying this to ourselves all day long to remind ourselves of this nature of impermanence. Is that more accurate? Am I getting it?
Right. That's right. To know impermanence moment by moment by moment. And not that we do, and we're going to forget, but it needs to be remembered and held very closely to our awareness to understand the reality of our lives, who we are at the core. And not only that, I want to say that the Buddha taught about impermanence, anicca, right? But to know anicca, you also have to know, we also have to know dukkha. Suffering.
Right. The relationship between the two. Yes.
That's right. Suffering. And then anatta, no self.
Okay.
And when we know one, we deeply know the other. They're the three rings of the reality, the reality that we swim in, the reality that we're stuck in. So to permeate one is to open the door to the other two. The biggest part of this that we don't talk about a lot, and I'll talk about my own, how I work through this and some of the losses that I've experienced, is that even the awareness of impermanence, right? Anicca, anicca, anicca. Important to say, even the awareness of impermanence itself is impermanent. And that's, so take that in, and that's the teaching on anatta, no self. So who we are as a construct, we're learning anew, moment by moment, by moment by moment. And you may understand impermanence one moment and not know it the next. And this would be called a normal human being. So
I love that.
The awareness itself is impermanent.
I love that, because I picture, and as you're saying, I can picture going through the day, and there'll be some times during the day when something happens and I might feel, for lack of a better term, more prepared because I have more awareness, but then I might go back about my business, as it were, and forget or get engrossed in something else. And this I think is a really dangerous place to be, but I've been there. Well, that already happened today, so clearly nothing else is going to arise. And that's not how it works, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's not how it works. It's not how the brain, and that's not how the mind work. So, but what would be the benefit of knowing anicca? What would be the benefit of knowing impermanence and living with that sense of impermanence? And I have a Zen teaching, a Zen story that I've been reading as a way to practice anicca, because it's a practice. It's a practice that's every day and all the time. And it's a practice that we do in meditation, in our sitting practice. We know the impermanence of a thought, the impermanence of a sensation. We know that meditation will be pleasant for a while, and then it will be unpleasant for a while, that the state of meditation is constantly changing. And this teaches us really the reality of a world that's constantly in flux. This is a Zen teaching that I've been using this week.
Okay, great.
This is my current teaching. I just love it. So I'll read it to you. And it's the Zen teacher is Shenshan and Dongsham. And I don't know if I'm saying this correctly because I'm not from the Zen lineage, but I happened to pick up this teaching and it's very real to me. It just speaks to me. It lights me up. And it says, Shenshan was mending clothes when Dongshan asked, "What are you doing?" Mending, said Senchan. Well, how's it going? Said Dongshan. And Shenchan answers, one stitch follows another. One stitch follows another. Dongshan says, and if I'm pronouncing this badly, it's my apologies to all the Zen practitioners.
And everyone is going to be okay with it because you're coming from a place of being helpful.
We've been traveling together for 20 years, and that's all you have to say. How can you be so clueless? And then he asks, how do you mend then? And the answer is, with each stitch, the whole earth is spewing flames. So when we really understand impermanence in the belly, we also understand what not to cling to.
Okay.
And we also understand the preciousness of every moment and the changeability of every moment. And it's a wake-up call. Our perception, what we think is permanent, is truly impermanent. So this is the teaching part, and I will talk a little bit about myself personally. We have 330 billion cells replaced daily in our body.
It's a lot of work going on in there.
Right. The cells in blood live only 3 to 120 days. The gut cells less than a week. So even this body that we call mind is in flux and changing. It's permeable, it's moving all the time. And to understand the nature of this is to land in a different way of being and seeing life. And so that's why I say anicca, anicca all day long, because this is the way to truly embrace and treasure and arrive in that moment and be here with it, be alive with it. And it takes us out of that narcolepsy in life, this trance we're in, this half asleep way we're walking around.
Yes. Yes. So if I may, I just want to recap a couple of things. I love the analogy you said a little minute ago about the swimming, right? That we are swimming with impermanence and no self and dukkha. And that just really landed for me. And I'm picturing, like, you know, when you swim and you'll be in a warm patch, and then all of a sudden you'll swim through a cold patch or a different current. And so I can really perceive that. And when you're talking about always having anicca on your tongue, do you think that that's the key to being more open to being able to understand and work with no self, and then also to release suffering? Is that the way in? Because I know you also mentioned like they're intertwined. Yes,
they're intertwined. So when I know anicca, which is hard to know, and there are days that I don't know it, I also know the suffering that goes with trying to hold on to what can't be held on to.
Okay.
Right? I also see the suffering in that, the suffering to clinging, to trying to control, to how we hold on and we don't really see the arising and the passing, right? And the clinging to what we love and the pushing away to what we don't. So you really start to see the role of suffering in the habitual mind. But more importantly than that, we begin to see what the Buddha talked about, not that there isn't a self, but we're not the self we take ourselves to be.
There you go.
We are this changing, impermanent being that is in flux as well. And when we lose that grip of self, we suffer a lot less. And like I said, that awareness is impermanent. So that brings up compassion, that I am going to trip over that crack in the sidewalk again and again.
Sure.
Taking myself to be a fixed and solid person that can be so easily upset and offended, you know?
Yes.
In terms of loss, though, and grief, moving into that subject, it's not just the Buddhist teachings that really count here. It's the great compassion for just being human that is so important when it comes to grief and loss. And when grief hits or loss hits, big grief, big loss, there's a lot to being human. There's a lot to work through. There's the and certainly in my times of when grief and loss have hit, one was coming to terms with a child with a permanent disability, you know, and what that meant, the grief that had to be walked through and still has to be walked through,
yes,
on a daily basis. And the other, which I think, Margaret, you know about, is when my husband had a significant stroke.
yes.
So when we walk up against moments like that, or times in our lives, the call for great compassion is the most necessary thing, the most important thing. As the human soul, the human being, when loss hits like that, and I know you've experienced so much of it in your life too, there's a physiological response, a nervous system response, an emotional response, a social response.
Yes, there's just so I love the way you're saying it, because it's like there's just so much. It's like it's everything in your life is touched.
That's right. Yeah.
Everything is touched.
Yeah. Yeah. And just the value, just shock alone, the way the brain takes in information, the way our physiology responds, the way our nervous system responds. There's a lot beyond the sense of self and control. And therefore, no intellectual knowledge is going to be the balm or the Band-Aid. It's the capacity to be present and compassionate with whatever is arising, and not rejecting any response that we have because of this complex being. And so there may be a shutdown, there may be a dissociative quality, there may be rage, there may be a real discombobulated feeling or dysregulated feeling. There may be numbness. There may be denial for quite a long time.
Sure.
We really don't know what this body-mind complex is going to respond to these big events in our lives. We really have no control.
That's true.
No control.
It's true. And when you talk about, this need for this compassion, there's two thoughts I have. One is when we're watching someone else, when we have a friend, a Sangha member, a family member going through something, there's, I would say, I guess, our ability to offer compassion appropriately. But I wonder if what you were talking about, what you might have been referencing more, is that compassion for yourself. How do we, and what are your thoughts around how do we best offer compassion to ourselves, right? Because like as I'm going through some things, I might be hard on myself. There's you should be able to do this or you shouldn't do that. And then, like you said, there's a social aspect too when you go through these things, and people mean well and they have opinions about how Wendy should be handling this, how Margaret should be handling this.
And we have opinions how
yes.
we should be handling these things. And here's where this self-compassion, for some reason, I want to call it compassion and not self-compassion, because when we say self-compassion, very often a lot of people will begin to think it's indulgent. Well, I should just really indulge myself. But I want to say it's compassion with a great big C, compassion for being human. and for the complexity of being a human.
I appreciate that you say that, because I do think that in this time, of discussion, of care, compassion, mindfulness, self-care, all of which I think are important things, some of them in the way that they are discussed, I do think some of them are discussed as if they are something that only certain people can have or extend. And to some degree, I understand that, but I'll just say, here's clinging. I want to live in a world where it doesn't matter your level of affluence, that you can still have compassion towards yourself, that it's not seen as like a thing for the privileged.
Right.
And I do think you're right when we use the phrase self this or self that, to some it might come up as like, well, you have time for that because you have food in your refrigerator. And granted, there is absolutely a difference of how you go through an experience when you have food in your refrigerator versus when you don't.
Yeah, I think a colleague of mine has been showing a film on grief, which I haven't yet seen, but some friends have seen. And in this film, she links grief to a great mystery, a great opening in life. And here is where this compassion meets the mystery, that when we can allow whatever is arising to arise and not reject it, not push it away, really be there with whatever is coming up for us, whether it's shock or numb or terrible, terrible grief or sadness or depression or rage or, anger, and not reject, not push away. That doesn't mean that we're allowing ourselves to act out in harmful ways with others or with ourselves.
Right.
But when we can really allow it with this beautiful feeling of kindness and compassion, oh, this is what's here now. I'm going to sit with this. I'm going to be here. I'm just going to allow. We're on a healing journey already. We're on a discovery, and there's a bit of a mysterious quality to it, because this grief and loss takes us on its own journey. Where it's going.
Right. Like we think we have this map, right? Like I think I have this map to my life, right? And, so poems aside about the path not taken, I think I have this map, and then, the life, impermanence, all these things come together and go, yeah, no, you don't. You're going over here now. And I can resist, and that's not going to help me. So I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. So we've got this map, and yes, by the nature that we are born into this life and we are living, we are on, I like that you use the word healing. Thank you so much. We are on a healing journey, because if I wasn't on that journey, so I'm a Buddhist that, believes in rebirth. Not everyone does, but so by the way, I just explained that. So this is why I interpret it this way. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here on this healing journey.
Right. That's right. That's right. And that there's a mystery to it, because It's not Margaret's story of a healing journey. It's a healing journey that Margaret doesn't know yet. And it's a healing journey that Wendy doesn't know yet. And the more we can embrace that unknown quality with compassion, with interest, not reject, not push away, not try to write it, that's when the journey becomes healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so now I'm picturing, so I know, you are helping people who are coming to you in your practice, and in your way, you're helping them. And I don't know if you use the same words we're using, because we're having, I'll say, a more, Buddhist specific discussion, right? But in your way, you're pointing them towards compassion. So there's that. And then there's yourself. Do you feel like the talk or the advice or the lessons that you give yourself are different than you give to someone who's, sitting in front of you?
Well, yes And absolutely, because
Okay.
not everyone is interested in the Buddha's words and
Truth.
the Buddha's path.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be deeply,
Yes. Yes.
and love it deeply and find it rich and wonderful every day. It's a great jewel. It's a great refuge for me. But in the role of a therapist, I'm not important. The person in front of me is, and it's my job to go on their journey, speak
Okay.
their language, go on their path, and help them uncover what's relevant for them, what's meaningful for them. It's not always Buddhism. I work with a lot of Christian
Mm-hmm.
and Jewish, and
Mm-hmm.
I've had Muslim
Absolutely.
clients, people who have no religion whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
They're not interested in a faith path. There are people who really like mindfulness, people who don't.
Mm-hmm.
Not important for me to impose my own life philosophy on others, but to join them where they are and help them see it more clearly and more deeply. It's their mystery and their journey. And I don't want to get in the way of that.
That's
So
yeah.
my job is to help them uncover it for themselves in their own language and in their own way. And they have a much greater wisdom about the
Mm-hmm.
path than I do. I'd be getting in the way. Their
Ah,
wisdom leads the way. Their
right.
experience and felt lived experience leads the way. And that's the map we're interested in, not mine.
Right.
So for me, um, the first huge loss, I mean, I've had many losses, but the loss that I'm referring to at this
Mm-hmm.
moment, because I want to bring it back to Buddhism,
Yes.
a while back, I don't remember how long ago, yeah, maybe 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
coming to terms with a child with a disability.
Okay.
That was a fascinating, painful moment, not one that I would wish on a parent,
Of course.
or anyone. It's a very
Mm-hmm.
hard moment to discover um, a significant impairment
Okay.
and a significant health impairment. Um, and I was in the middle of the dedicated practitioner program at Spirit Rock when this happened.
Wow.
2.5 year program. And I remember absolutely devastated and floored by this
Sure.
in every way, because, your whole dream and idea and concept about future is gone, or not the one that I thought
Because
it
you
was.
have this idea. I'm thinking, so I don't have children, but I see this idea of this is what my child will be when he or she grows up. And I see all of you doing it a little bit differently, so I don't mean that in a way as in like, forcing a will upon a child, although I have seen parents try that. But just like there's that thought that you must picture, like when my child is this age, this is what will probably be happening, or this person might live, or I wonder what he or she will do when they grow up, or who or she will they look like or talk like more.
Well, I think this is where that time, that moment, all of the Buddha's teachings really came alive for me.
Mm-hmm.
We jumped off the paper and out of the curriculum into the reality of life. And that was a defining moment, a discerning moment
Mm-hmm.
for me, where what we were studying in the dedicated practitioner program
Right.
became so alive. One of the things that we were studying, of course, were the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And the first foundation, as you know, is the body. The second is feeling tone. And the third is mind.
Okay.
mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of thoughts. And in the middle of this grief process over my son, which I still go to and go through, was this noticing in the middle of the grief the difference between the thought about my son and my son.
Ah, so separating those two things. Here is my son. Here is what I'm thinking, but they're not. My thoughts are not my son. My son, they're not my thoughts.
That's right. And the space between those was the space of rest.
Okay.
And that I learned that I could rest between.
So if I'm understanding, you didn't have to be in either place all the time.
That's
You
right.
didn't have to be in the place of this is what's happening with my son. And you also didn't have to be in the place of this is what I wanted or this is what I thought. You could be in this place in between. Is that a fair way to say
I think
it?
it's the discernment between the idea of my son,
Okay.
which is a thought,
Yes. That we make, that
and
we
the
manufacture.
reality of my son without a thought. And we begin to learn, what I began to learn is the suffering, the dukkha, was with my concept of my son. What I wanted, my fantasy, how I saw him, how I saw me, my commentary, all that suffering was dukkha. And what wasn't dukkha was the loss of that content.
Ah.
Emptiness of that content. Then there's just love.
This is my son. I love him.
Not
And
even
it's
this is my son, and not even I love him. It's
okay.
just love.
Just love.
Just love. It's just love. And in that love, there's a place of rest. That's not to say the journey has not been excruciating and difficult and frightening and disappointing. Our medical system is not always easy to manage. That resting place, the stillness, is dropping the eyeing, the minding, the imagining, the storytelling, is to see it as it's arising. Just like the Buddha said that our thoughts are imaginary and they're impermanent, they're temporary. He talked about it as like little air bubbles that were popping. When even in the worst crisis, if we can know that we have a way to rest, we have a place to rest. We're not lost in that constant ruminating and going on and worrying and narrating and storytelling. And yet, even that awareness isn't always there. When it's hard, it's hard. When I have to worry, I have to worry. When I'm caught in ruminating, I'm caught in ruminating. It's not a permanent state for me to be able to rest in that, knowing how I'm identifying and creating an image. So it's something that, I move in and out of, in between, and I can't say what tomorrow will be like. Tomorrow I may be lost in my story about this particular family member.
And you might be resting, or you might do both those things more than once during the day, right?
That's right. That's right. And as a matter of fact, right before I got on to speak with you, so interesting, I went on, I took a little glance at the Facebook page. And I have a dear friend who just lost her daughter.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And I remember talking to her several months ago. And again, we want to come back to and bring up compassion in the healing process, that compassion is the great balm and the great wisdom in the healing process. And I remember we talked about her daughter who was really struggling and lost her struggle. And what I remember most about the conversation with my friend was her capacity to sit with the reality, looking
Mm-hmm.
at this straight, not not hedging her bets, really looking at it with clear glasses, very straight, but with this amazing compassion at the suffering of her daughter and the things we cannot control.
Wow.
This was out of her control completely. And there was just so much she could do.
And how do you think she was able to do that?
Well, that's a good question, Margaret, because here we are back at practice, a Buddhist practitioner.
Yes.
Practice means practice.
I have to keep, you mean I have to keep living and experiencing this stuff? I feel like this is what you're telling me.
What I'm telling you is some of us will have a practice of meditation, and we're lucky. Meditation is a wonderful thing. But many of us will have a wisdom practice, understanding the teachings, the great teachings.
Mm-hmm.
We all need a practice on letting go.
That's for sure.
We all need a practice on letting go. And the wisdom of letting go, the truth of letting go, the truth of how much control we actually have. And when we are working with the truth of letting go, we must also work with the truth of compassion, because it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Not easy. Not easy. And this compassion is the balm, it's the kindness that makes it all possible to see and bear and have the wisdom and the strength. The compassion is the groundwork on which all the rest of this comes.
I'm so glad you mentioned that it's not easy, because maybe sometimes I think that being compassionate could be easier. So I think this is where sometimes I'm not compassionate as I could be with myself. When I find myself being judgmental, sometimes I find myself reprimanding myself that, I could be doing that differently. I could be less judgmental, et cetera, et cetera. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the reminder that it's not easy, because sometimes it's not. Yeah, I think there are some situations where it's easier to extend compassion to yourself and others, and some where for me as a human, I have to work a lot harder at certain things.
Nothing that we're talking about is easy at all.
That's true.
Grief and loss and impermanence, these things are not easy things for the soul to bear, for the human to bear. And there will be days where insight is low. There will be days when dukkha is high, suffering is high. That is the nature of it. And there will be days where we'll feel strength and resilience, and other days where we crumble. And that's the nature of it. It's always new. This awareness, this wisdom is impermanent too. Sometimes we're in the stream and we're swimming in it a little bit more. We've got to grasp. And other days, when other times we don't, we're challenged again. Part of being human.
I guess that's why one of my dear friends sometimes looks at me and shakes her head and says something like, just a minute ago, I thought you were, this is exactly what she says, but it's kind of like this. Just a minute ago, I thought you were so wise. And she's like, and right now I'm just shaking my head because I'm just like any other human. I just go back and forth.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So Wendy, in practicing compassion, I will compassionately not keep you all day long. That's compassionate to you. For the rest of us, we could listen forever and it would be you extending compassion to all of us, but it wouldn't be compassionate towards you. Before I say goodbye, is there something that you would like to get to express to us?
Well, I would say that just to review a little, maybe review of some of the things that really are important to me in my practice, in dealing with the stresses and losses of life and the bumps and the ups and downs, is be very close with the word anicca,
Okay.
impermanence. Find ways to have this in your vocabulary on a daily basis. Start with something small. Like if I'm walking down Main Street somewhere and
Mm-hmm.
the store has gone out of business that's been there a long time, that's a good time to stop and note impermanence, right? Just a
Oh,
little
yes.
anicca happening. Right? If I'm doing so well in my exercise program and I could do a push up for I don't know how many minutes and now I can't, to notice anicca, it's changing. The
Mm-hmm.
small and big ways, everything around us is constantly changing. This is such an important teaching in our lives, so that when we are faced with the bigger challenges, we are looking at life through the lens of the changing nature of reality. The changing nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the one thing I want to come back to in ending our interview is make this term anicca your friend. See the impermanence, big and small, and really let it sink in to your awareness, your daily sense of yourself and the way things are in life. And all of us, with compassion, from one day to next, we're still learning. We're all toddlers in this. We're
Yes.
all beginners. We have beginner mind. So bring in great compassion for yourself, these teachings, getting through life, great compassion that it's always beginning again. It's always beginner mind. I don't know if I will ever have full enlightenment, but I will always have compassion for my beginner's mind.
That is beautiful. Thank you. And thank you so much for that, making anicca your friend. That could be like a mantra that we could all carry with our day through our day. So thank you very much for everything. I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, Margaret.
You've been listening to the Death Dhamma podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, margaretmeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.